Dehini and Khadija.
Okay, sir. So I'll be beginning this presentation. So good afternoon, everyone. This is a presentation on the essay Myth, Ambivalence, and Evil. Now, this is a very longish essay, and probably I have or read it would not be able to justify it fully, but we'll try to make this through. And this essay is by Arpana Dharwarkar. Yeah, Dharwarkar. Okay. So, to give you basic overview of this essay, it actually deals with the post-independence theater and the role of myth and history in it. So, what basically happened is that after colonialism came out of the picture, the revival of history became very apparent. History and myth. So, to give an identification to the India, to give an identification to India as a nation, it was necessary to bring out the old modes of representation, which were myth and history. So you have a lot of stories, you have a lot of literature and performances and works of arts based on myth uh, and following those works of art, you have a lot of things in history as well. So uh, uh, and it was extracted from the past and in form of myth and history. Now, to define myth, well, it's pretty self-explanatory, but I'll still do that. It's basically a fictional narrative. It involves divine and heroic human agents. Okay? And then you have history, which denotes the oral and written record of lives and events which are actually documented. So, using these things, post-independent theater and the Indian past was brought into the present. Now, usually you have so there's this whole in the very first section of the essay, there's this whole sort of data factual representation of what actually happened. So the very first dramatic phase is so the one who inaugurated this phase, I would say, was Dharamveer Bharti, and he wrote Andha Yug. It is a verse play based on Mahabharata, and it's basically more of an elaborated version of the aftermath of 18-Day War. Along with that, after that, you have two plays by Mohan Rakesh, which are also can be said historical plays. One is Ashad Ka Din, and the other one is Lahore Ke Rajhans. So both of these plays again, so history plays, so they take into account some historical events. So you have Ashad Ka Din based on Ashad Ka Ek Din based on Kalidas and his portrayal as an artist and his conflict between his passion and the material attractions. And you have Lahore Ke Rajans, which is about Lord Buddha's younger brother, Nand, and his journey towards enlightenment. So you
It's
see,
Laharo ke Rajhans.
oh, sorry, Lahore Ke Rajans, sorry. Yeah, so Laharo Ke Rajans is about that. So basically, the first active decade in Indian drama after independence, the major new playwrights were concerned about establishing and they were debating about the relation of um, new present. When you bring out the past through the narratives of myth and history. So all of these things were taken from the past or maybe pre-colonial or pre-modern era of India and brought into current dramas. After the early 1960s, the field of Indian theatre diversifies, and as there's an arrival of realist, existentialist, absurdist, and left-wing political moods, political ideologies in modern drama. So now you have a lot of experimental drama and performer-centric drama, and they were both both of these types were performed in urban as well as non-urban locations. So the absorption was so it was the things were absorbed from the past narratives and practices and now presented in presented in present by using these ideas or ideologies. So these were also affected. So you have Vijay Tendulkar's Ghashim Ghanshiram Kotwal. It's a Marathi play. So it was set during the corrupt reign of late 18th century Peshwa rulers. So you have these things which again you have an effect of all of these realist existentialist absurdist ideologies and in the current state drama. Again, this phase was more about transplanting major Hindu plays and their classical subject matters to the linguistic and cultural context of his remote northeastern state. So you have these um, how should I put this? You have these ideas and ideologies now were taken with the help of classical subject matter. They were taken into the present and represented. Now the third phase of the same thing, now you have the revivals and translation of the old plays, and usually the old Sanskrit plays were now translated chronologically. You have bhasas plays, you have Mahabharata translated into various different ways. You have plays like Urubhangam and I don't Kalidas Shakuntalam. So all of these plays were now translated, and again, so you have this whole history revival phase in post-colonial drama, where there was an attempt to bring the past into present and trying to create a domain in where 2.5 millennia of texts were performed. You know, a lot of dramas and Indian theater and everything was that performed simultaneously. And you have the presence of past in present. Now the next section is about myth, history, and the nation, where the writer is trying to establish how the idea of nation, or we can also say the nationalism, which is prevalent especially during colonial and post-colonial times, how that was brought with the help of elements like myth and history. So now it becomes important to understand the idea of nation as well. So what happened is that uh, when you are trying to when you have a loss of identity, you're trying to establish it. So there was a need of the the concept of nation, especially after colonialism, where you have to have a certain identity. So the beginning of this section is all about the controversies in the discussion of nationalism. So you have um, controversies like that nation is a modern institution, whereas others might say that nation is not a modern institution, it's a modern expression of pre-existing experiences of nationhood. So what they mean is that there is also a debate in when we talk about nationalism, that okay, the concept of nationalism is modern, whereas some people might say that no, the concept of nationalism is not modern, but uh, the way the expression is presented, the things are expressed is modern, not the idea of nation. Also, there was another argument that few nationalists would get rid of myth making because they were not true, you know, as the name says, suggest myth. But some nationalist sentiment would also link all of these myths into and consider this as something as a cultural resource which also defines the nation. So all of these arguments were already existing. Now there comes another argument by Smith, uh, which which brings into picture what is known as historical ethno-symbolism. So for to understand that, you have to understand the pre-existing notion of nationalism. So you have one notion which is known as primordials. Now, what is a primordialist notion of nationalism? So it's basically an idea that nations or ethnic identities are fixed and they are natural and ancient. So throughout the history, nothing has changed. You have the idea of ethnic identities which is very fixed. Whereas there is another approach to nationalism as well, which is known as uh, pre-nihilist approach, where what it means is that a nation has a national identity embedded, and you have, so a nation is formed with a cultural heritage, a common cultural heritage or language. But to there was a there was a different approach brought by Smith, which considered the idea of nationalism as a historical ethno-symbolism. So what is that? So uh, ethno-symbolists uh, would say that the nationalism's power is in its myth, memories, tradition, symbolism of ethnic heritage, etc., etc. So it's like basically you bring everything that is there in the past to have an idea of a perfect nation. And when you consider all of these things together, when you consider the elements of myth, memory, you have historical records, you have tradition, you have culture, all of this together constitutes a nation, and that constitutes nationalism. So the process of nation formation is historical. It unfolds over a period of time. It keeps on changing. It's very fluid, and cultural identities uh, are formed over the years. It's not necessary that things are like that are fixed. So now comes the question that there is the need is not to assert the existence of nation in the past, but to determine what the appeal to historical cultural antecedent means to the present. So basically, now the need is not to look at what currently nation is. The need is to look at its journey and what it has, uh, the pre-existing historical and cultural aspects. You have to take into consideration while you're considering the idea of nation. So then it talks about that the notion that we think that this is okay, this is nationalism, when we constitute it to a certain ethnic group or language, that's not possible in India. You cannot idealize Indian past saying that okay, this is an Indian past, and this is what it constitutes, and this is what the idea of nation is. It's very fluid and it's very natural. So so the issue now comes is that one second, sir. Yeah, so the issue now comes is that how do we go about how do we trace the evolving idea of nation and nationhood? So what happened is that immediately after post-colonial times, sorry, after colonial times, you have this idea of an ideal nation where you bring out all the things that were in the past, and you could say that this is Indian culture. But this is a very narrow-minded nationalist approach. What the thing is, and it was very well argued here, that the idea of nation is itself very ambivalent. It's very distinction. So basically, it keeps on contradicting itself, especially with the colonial views of the Indian past. So the concept here is that when you had an external agency over the country, we had British over us. The thing that united the whole nation, India, was the fact that we all were anti-colonial. So this was our idea of nationalism. But bringing that out, keeping that out, if we consider India as a nation, so you cannot divide India in terms of languages, you cannot divide India in terms of ethnicity, race, nothing. Because India as a country is very complicated. So when you bring out the idea of nationalism, you would focus on the fact that okay, or every person in India was connected by the fact that they were against colonial views. But now when that comes out of the picture, what happens is when you revive the past and myth and history, the post-colonial representation is not um, uh, it's not, you have to see that okay, if you're picking out something from the past and it's of Sanskrit origin or anything, you're bringing out to the audience which is not that unified. That audience has different ethnic groups, and the audience has different perceptions and religious, social, and political environment. So these playwrights, when they started writing these things, they did not this was not meant to unify the Hindu identity in modern India. This was to scrutinize, this was to examine the dominant tradition of the past and put it out among pluralist nation, as Rumina Sethi has correctly said. So the discovery and recovery of Indian past was a collaborative enterprise. You, it was not only us, the Indian playwrights, which tried to examine the past, but it were also European Orientalists who also started reviving this. So there were two views, and you have 1 second. So now the nationalist way of reviving the past was so these what these playwrights basically do is they took the past and put it out in a pluralistic nation. So the ways of putting things out were different, and they were not just mere notion of nationalism. Now the issues of colonialist misrepresentation and nationalist reaction and the post-colonial revision can instead be subsumed within the dialectic of satiric and heroic discourses. So basically, in simple terms, if we have to the challenges that the ideas of national identity has faced in India, there are two ways of looking at the texts. One would be satiric, and the other would be heroic. If we consider satiric way of thinking of looking back and satiric way of representation, you have broad strategy where there is you have um, satiric representation basically employs irony. It employs it uses ridicule as the purpose of attack, whereas heroic way of representation was more romantic, idealistic, and sentimental. So you have these two ways of representing um, the playwrights, the drama. Mm, Other than that, when the colonialism came to an end, basically, now there was a great interest in reviving the cultural legacies, and now we had a vast amount of literature in front of us where we could go back and bring out things in the present. So this section is all about how the idea of nation was created, and also at the end of this section, it is said that yes, history and myth has been used interchangeably a lot of times. So you have the biggest example of Mahabharata. In Mahabharata in Sanskrit, it has described that it is itihas, but you also consider Mahabharata as something which is a portion of which is mythical or mythological. So in short, history may be mythologized. Myth can be historicized. So things can be interchangeable. But in this essay, what the focus is more on Mahabharata only, where different theoretization of myth could be taken into consideration, and there were different variations, and there were different ways Mahabharata over the period of time has re-represented itself by various authors. So this essay would basically discuss that. Now, Khadija will continue.
Yeah, so I will begin with this part, the Mahabharata as a post-colonial text. So as we know, we all might have read, or if not read, we have heard about Mahabharata. It's one of the greatest epic written in India, and it is an Asian work which has a cultural presence, and it has been produced and adapted many like in textual and visual representations many times. It is the classic which is absorbed into the dialectic of heroic and ironic. And as A.K. Ramanujan says that the epic is not a text but a tradition, one that involves the classical and modern languages of the Indian subcontinent. At any given historical moment, Mahabharata involves the full spectrum of cultural forms that might be oral or written, textual and performative, uh, classical or folk. Then the coincidence, then it says that uh, the incorporation of Indian classics into European philological and critical scholarship, the literary forms to print culture, and the institutionalize of urban commercial theater are some of the few reasons for the circulation of Mahabharata, which it says that Mahabharata has seen such a shift from the pre-modern phases to the modern phases. Like earlier, it used to be all about tradition, but after independence, many writers and playwrights used the themes of Mahabharata or the epic Mahabharata into producing something that was not just limited to tradition, but it like they gave new perspective to the epic and wrote many plays. It also says that India. Um, okay, so I come to this next uh, topic, which is epic of ambivalence. Now, ambivalence means having mixed feelings or contradictory ideas about something or someone. So it suggests that like the epic of Mahabharata is a story of courage, bravery, sacrifice, and
I think she has lost connection. Yeah, till she comes back, how? So who would like tell me what the
yes,
essay seems to be driving
yes,
at?
sir.
Yeah, Abhijay, you are
um,
back. Okay, fine. Yeah, continue.
sir, may I continue or is
Yeah,
someone
please,
like
please. No, no,
answering
please.
this?
No, please continue. We'll discuss later.
Okay, okay, okay. So Mahabharata, as we all know, refers to the 18-day war between Pandavas and the Kauravas, who belong to the same family. Sir, I'm so sorry, the network
No
is very
issues.
unstable, but I'll
No.
try.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a it refers to the 18-day war between Pandavas and Kauravas, who belong to the same family, for the throne of Hastinapur. So the title means so the title means the great or complete, and the word Bharat refers to the descendants of Bharat, who was the son of Shakuntala and Dushyant. So and Bharat was also the ancient name of India. So many writers
Okay, till she comes back, she resumes. If someone has to say, if somebody can tell me what is the essay driving at, can anybody uh, give it a shot? You may be wrong, but then trying is always good. What seems to be the thrust of the essay till now?
Sir, I think it is to analyze the post-colonial influences in the plays written in the period.
Okay.
Like the author is trying uh, hard to analyze that the national identity and everything is given to us by the post-colonial.
Sir, may I continue?
Yeah, so Rushi, we'll hold on to that observation. We'll continue the conversation after Khadija's presentation. Yeah, Khadija.
So I was
No
saying that
issues. No problems. No.
yeah, so many playwrights and writers have described the Mahabharata differently. Like I was saying, the German Indologist Hermann Oldenburg described the Mahabharata as national saga of India. And Ramanujan says that it's not a text but a tradition. And Aurobindo Ghosh has described it as the creation and expression of a collective national mind. It is the poem of a servant.
Relax, relax. No need to hurry. Take your own time, relax.
Yes, sir, but there's also like too much.
So it doesn't matter if things, I think if there is a network issue, then maybe once it comes
Yes,
back,
sir.
so there is no need to worry about it.
Okay.
It happens
Yeah.
online lives.
Yes, sir. Then it says that K.R. Srinivasa says that it is it is the cultural encyclopedia of the Hindus. So as we know, Mahabharata, like when it comes to our minds, we connect it with Hindus. Like I am not being like I'm not saying like I'm not being prejudiced here, but still, Mahabharata, when it comes to our minds, it says it is about Hindus, and it has in the Hindu conception of time one complete cycle in the history. It's known as Yuga. So I researched a little about it. So the first was Satyug, then Treta Yuga, and which was the Yuga of Ram, then Dwapar Yuga, which was in which the Mahabharata took place, and then the Kali Yuga. So it is said that the Mahabharata was happened in the end of Dwapar Yuga, and after the Krishna's death, I guess Kali Yuga started. So with every yuga, it says that with every yuga, the morality keep declining, and the actions in the Mahabharata suggest that they have some characteristics of Kalyug as well. Because one of the characteristics of Kalyug is that the breakdown of family structures and immorality or trickery, and all of these characteristics we can find in Mahabharata, the war that happened. Uh, as it is a conflict between two families, two branches of the same family, it is a war without morals. Uh, then Pandey's socio-cultural reading about Mahabharata reflects that contradiction, one second. Okay, the contradictions of an age of transition where an old aristocratic and ritual order was yielding place to a new order in which lawlessness, tyranny, social miscegenation, religious capitalism, and heterodoxy were emerging as significant features. Um, Then Ruth Cecily Katz points out that the full significance of the concept of Kalyug in the Mahabharata becomes evident when one focuses the fact that the Kalyug is a present age. So during the course of the war, the ethics and morality become unresolvable because Pandavas defeated or killed many Kaurava warriors like Bhishma, Dronacharya, Karna, and Duryodhan by trickery, and Krishna was the major person. Krishna was who helped them in this trickery with his tricks, and that's how they defeated most of the Kaurava warriors. Even though the Kaurava did the same thing, but like they were even more immoral than the Pandavas. But it doesn't hide the fact that Pandavas were also immoral, and they did not fight the war with the proper maryada or the rules of the war um, that were maybe present during the Treta Yuga when Ram fought with Ravana. So it further says that even Yudhishthir, who was known as Dharmaraj, did a lot of wrong things because of them being putting his wife on stake when he had nothing left while playing that game with Kauravas. I don't remember what it was. what the game was. But yeah, like when he had nothing left, he put Draupadi on stake, and that's how the whole Haran and everything happened. In the epic, there are no distinction. Then it further says that in the epic there are no distinction between good and evil, because even the most culpable Kaurava characters, like Duryodhan and Dushasan, had some good qualities, and many of the older partisans, such as Bhishma and Dronacharya, who were men of great stature, decided to stay with the Kaurava side because of loyalty, and maybe because some of them were bounded by some promises, and some wanted to stay by their side as a family, as a sense of family solidarity. Then, during the course of the war, issues of ethic and morality become unsolvable, and it might and like as I said that they defeated many Kaurava warriors with trickery, and it might suggest that Pandavas weren't that great either. And the whole sir, is there too much disturbance in the background because some construction work is going on?
No, we can't hear it. We can hear you fine.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Yeah.
Then furthermore, the authors of the epic stress the immoral nature of these acts, like the acts of the censure of Krishna as well as Pandava brothers. So we can say that victory was essential for Pandavas, and although they won, but they did not do it with Maryada or the dharma, like the rules of the war. Uh, like in this epic, the good men were forced to make evil choices, and that's how some of the events in the epic of Dharma becomes the act of adharma. Like Krishna helped Arjuna in defeating, I guess it was Karna by delaying the sunset. And there was another example where in the last fight he goes to Duryodhan and tells him that you cannot go naked in front of your mom, and all of these incidents. And in the last fight too, he tells I guess Bhim that the lower part of Duryodhan's body isn't is weak, so he should strike him there and everything. So these are some of the incidents which tells us that even though the Mahabharata is about dharma, but there are many acts of adharma, and that's how it becomes that's how the myth becomes an ambivalence. Ben Buchanan therefore describes this epic as a series of stated problems, imprecisely and therefore inconclusively resolved. And then he leaves us with a question that whose is heaven and whose is hell. Now, the next section is colonial and post-colonial construction of the Mahabharata. So, this powerful epic became the work of interest for many writers in the 19th and 20th century in India. Along the works of 19th century Indian cultural nationalists, Romesh Chandra Dutt's condensed English verse translation of the great epics of ancient India, Swami Vivekananda's Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and Aurobindo Ghosh commentary on the two poets, Vyasa and Valmiki. If I'm not wrong, theaters were introduced to Indian public through British while we were colonized, and the theater of the colonial period in the 19th century helped with inscribing the Mahabharata with nationalist meaning. So there were many plays such as Michael Madhusudan Dutt's Sarmishta, Rabindranath Tagore's Chitra that initiated the traditions of literary drama, and took up the episodes of Mahabharata for poetic elaboration, but they couldn't perform it on stage. Like that remains outside commercial theatrical performances. Then there were some well-known episodes of combat and death from the Mahabharata, which became anonymous plays that used the birth of the protagonist as an occasion for topical anti-colonial commentary. I think by this they mean that they used the episodes of death from the Mahabharata uh, to like as a protest against British. Maybe I did not understand this properly, but that's what I understood from this. So then it also as you also mentioned, the several plays by Indian playwrights that are written on the stories or episodes of Mahabharata, focusing on several or individual character from the epic, such as Arjuna's young son Abhimanyu or Draupadi, One such example is K.P. Kadhilkar's Kichika Vada. Kichika, who was the character who attempts to violate the honor of Draupadi. Then it says that since independence, the text-based traditions of philosophical, scholarly, critical, and popular engagement with the Mahabharata has not just continued but expanded considerably throughout the nation. Then the adaptation of the epic and its stories or episodes don't stop just as plays. The tradition of the popular urban performance based on Mahabharata were then transferred to the new media of film, television, and videos. The Mahabharata appeared as on national television in 1989 under V.R. Chopra's direction. We all must be aware of this, especially after its premiere on TV during the lockdown. So it says that Mahabharata has gone through a lot of transformation in the past half century, and even the some of the playwrights have written plays on the female characters such as Draupadi, Kunti, and Gandhari, and gave them a powerful critique of patriarchy. Um, then the literary drama of Dharamvir Bharati and Girish Karnad moves away from the heroic and the traditional or the moral indeterminacy, and they move forward to a shift from heroic self to ironic self. They constitute the literary dimension not just of nationalist ideology, but but they use the myth of the Mahabharata to focus on the new problems of the new nation. Then comes the section Mahabharata and the new radicals of urban performance. So the thematic shift from example to irony. In this shift, theatre has played a very prominent role because theatre has helped people to view Mahabharata or its stories in a new light. So in thematic terms, these plays grapple to various degrees with the philosophical and moral ramification of the Mahabharata stories. And then it says that there are two leading contemporary proponents of theatres who used the epic of Mahabharata. Their writing styles were different. One was Panikkar and one was Tiyam. And it says that they were both influenced by the work of Bhasa, the classical Sanskrit author, who wrote 6 Mahabharata plays. So Panikkar produced Urbangham and several other plays. He wrote 3 plays in 1978, 1984, and 1987. And the major influence was from Bhasa. And Thiam also premiered his most successful Mahabharata plays, Chakravyuh, which focuses on Abhimanyu. And there are extensive reference to this crisis in Bhasa's, like he's taken influence from Bhasa's Dat Ghatotkacham. And then after 7 years, he also completed his own Mahabharata trilogy with Karnabharam, which was a tribute to Panikkar as well as destructive politics, an allegory to destructive politics of Manipur region. So then it says that how Bhasas and how Thiam's and Panikkar's plays were different from each other. Both of these playwrights had different writing styles, but despite these differences, both Panikkar and Thiam practiced an elaborate and stylized Mahabharata theatre based on Bhasa's text. Then it says that the entire shift from traditional to modern urban modes of transmission through performances. Through this, we can understand that how Mahabharata has always been a vast topic within which we can distinguish epic, classical, post-colonial, colonial, and post-classical phases. The range of representation is always broad, and like it has gone through many different mediums, like urban and rural, modern and traditional, textual and performative genres. So Mahabharata is still today it is adapted into TV shows and people watch it with great interest. Thus, we can say that the myth of Mahabharata it was never going to be forgotten, and it is going to be read or watched by people for years to come in some medium or the other, and it is going to influence the writer of writer of the future as well, produce something new or unique out of the age-old myth. Now we come to the Dharamvir Bharati's Andhayug. Now I haven't read the work, but the paragraph above the title suggests that Andhayug is the rewriting of Mahabharata as a modernist poetic drama. So it was the first acknowledged drama after independence. and it was written in Hindi, and it translates to the Andayuk translates to the age of blindness. And I think the title here holds great significance because it is set in the last day of Great Mahabharat War, which was the 5 Act tragedy, and it was written after the partition of India. So, in where the human lives and ethical values were declined, and there was violence and aggressive selfhood and bloodshed everywhere. So, this is an anti-war play which created a sensation as a radio play in Allahabad. Uh, then it led to the production by Mumbai-based theatre director Satyadev Dubey, and then it became famous throughout the nation as one of the most important uh, post-colonial modernist drama. And it separates pre and post-independence literary conceptions of myth and history. Um, Nemi Chandra Jain describes the play as a first modern work in Hindi, and it has a very deep relation between poetry and drama. Then, since its first staging, the language of performance have included Bengali, Manipuri, Assamese, Marathi, and it has been performed in many cities, including like Agra, Aurangabad, Banaras, Bilaspur, and many more. Andayuk maintains its atmosphere of unreal suffering through two critical structural choices. By the beginning of it begins with the end of the epic war, the heroic movement, and moves directly to the experience of irrevocable loss by focusing on the defeated Kauravas rather than the victorious Pandavas. Because after all, it was a war between two branches of the same family, and even though the Pandava won, but they were not satisfied with their own victory because of the bloodshed and how they killed their own brothers. The main characters of the play are uh, Gandhari, Krishna, Dhritarashtra, and Yuyutsu. And the central trope of blindness, introduced in the title and repeated many times, extends from Dhritarashtra's physical handicap to every facet of his realm and comes to symbolize the failure of all forms of authority and political power. Even though the war was won, but the violence and blood, because of the violence and bloodshed, the Pandava brotherhood degenerated so rapidly after the victory. And Yudhishthir described the victory as long, slow, agonizingly accomplished suicide. Then it says that the core of the play consists of attack on the Pandavas and Krishnas by a three-pronged attack on Pandavas and Krishnas by Gandhari, Ashwatthama, and Yuyutsu, which makes these three central characters of the play. At an intellectual level, the play accepts that the advent of Kali Yuga entails a continuous decline in the values since the time of Mahabharata. I think by this she also somehow tries to say that the partition and the bloodshed because of that had dehumanized the society of that time and had turned that age into an Andhayug, the age of blindness. It somehow also reminds me of Theatre of Absurd and how the war had, like, there was a similar situation that when it has been mentioned in the essay also. Then it says that there were so many movements, like the immediate, like the Quit India movement, Bengal famine of 1943, genocide by partition in 1947, Mahatma Gandhi's August 1942 ultimatum of the British to quit India. All of these, at a time when fascist forces had the advantage over the Allied powers in both Europe and Southern Asia. Because of all of these events, the writer, I think it has been mentioned in the essay that he was a nationalist, and he wrote this play to bring out to bring out these events, and with every and for a writer and thinker like Bharati, the bloodshed and everything cancelled any positive emotions of the independence. Uh, then one of the writer's most important responsibility in independent India is to forge a meaningful relationship with the cultural past, not just for himself, but for the common man. And his motive here is to free the common man from the blind beliefs and traditions of the past, and put forward, like put in front of them what is happening in the new post-colonial India. The harshness of Andhayuk is thus part of the reaction against the cultural complacency that Indians had supposedly spun around themselves in the tradition from colonial subjection to independence. Then Andhayuk expresses the swift destruction of expectations after independence in a sense of cultural failure. That became a theme of writing for many writers, artists after during that time. He also says that Mahabharata, he used Mahabharata as a mythic vehicle for this experience because over the centuries, the Asian characters and the traditions had become so fixated in our minds that the in our racial unconscious, that something said through the medium resonate much more strongly on several levels in the mind of a cultural reader. Um, then he also describes underuse as universal and says that science, religion, philosophy, ethical values, all of these were among the institutions involved in the decline of European civilization that began in the 19th century. Moving on, Bharti describes Hindi literature as world literature and also argues that Hindi is neither an inert substance simply waiting to be acted upon by external influences, nor is it a body of isolated writing that can develop apart from the world traditions. He says that the responsibility of Indian writer is not different than the responsibility of any other writer in the world. I assume he here talks about the importance of Hindi literature and wants a new direction for Hindi writing in India. um, Andreyuk participates in the history of modernity and shares in it major philosophical literary attributes with other literary works as well. Like here are some, like Nietzsche's godless universe resonates in the death of the Lord. Then the notion of pervasive blindness in the app evokes the dark night or dark era of civilization. Um, then Hindi critics have always also compared the blind Dhritarashtra to Thomas Beckett's and Eliot's Murder in the Cathedral, and have also suggested the Kaurava city of Hastinapur in Bharti's place sustain the same kind of ironic myth making in the metropoles of modernist classics. Uh, okay, okay. Um, so now in the play Andhayuk, the major characters are representatives of fast declining civilization in the 19th century and a century doomed by two worlds, fascism, nuclear holocaust, and the Cold War. If you look at it from the universalist perspective, Dhritarashtra, Dhritarashtra, Dhritarashtra's blindness, Gandhari's grief, and Yuyutsu's self-hatred, and the slave mentality, the interchangeable, invokes for Bharti the destruction of truth and principle in every era. Thus, through this play, she might want to say us that it does not designate any specific age or era, but it is present in all the ages, like in past, in present, and as future as well. Then it says that Andhayuk has been performed since past 40 years throughout India, and it also talks of how it was performed at different theaters across the country, such as Dubey's 1964 revival in Calcutta. Then it was adopted in a radio play. Then Alkazi's production at Alkota, Satyadev Dubey 1962 production, Marathi English actor Manavendra's Chutneys made a lasting impression on Ashwath. Then it all the actors who played Ashwath, such as Om Shivpuri, Raj Babbar, and and many more. The Andhayuk, it ends with how Andhayuk in its totality symbolizes the process of intense political engagement with the Mahabharata, through which a part of the epic narrative is adapted modernist vehicle for the theatre, having a great influence on the people, and how the myth of Mahabharata has been used by Bharati to depict what was going in India at that time, and how she wanted to bring a change through an anti-war drama, and like with the themes of that time, how she wanted to bring enlightenment using the themes of using the myth of Mahabharata. Yes, thank you. Okay, so it's still left, and then we will continue with the next part.
Okay, thank you, Kavija. So the next two parts are relatively shorter than what we read before. This part is K.N. Panikar's Urubhangam, and now the discussion would happen on the play Urubhangam by K.N. Panikar and how it has taken elements from Mahabharata and yet it is different. So K.N. Panikar's Mahabharat plays were very powerful and they were very famous, and they were um famous in the sense that they are still celebrated, and even in few literary festivals you would see. So recently it was also in 2000 and 2001 it was inactive, especially in National School of Drama in New Delhi and National Theatre Festival also. So basically, how is it different from Bhasa's version of Mahabharat or the original Vyas version of Mahabharat? So his meeting, what he has done is that he has taken the classical elements and he has put it in contemporary grounds with and shown a relation between narration and action. So how is this? How is this story different? So what happens in this is an episode of Mahabharata has taken where it begins on the battlefield and there is a battle going on. The main focus is on the incident between Duryodhan and Bhim, where Bhim kills Duryodhan by attacking his thighs, and this is what happened in original Mahabharata. Now, how this play is different here, what happens that after Bhim shatters Duryodhan's thighs in and violates the rules of combat, violates the rule of that fight, that combat, Krishna's older brother Balram objects to this. But here the difference is that there is a change in the character of Duryodhan, and also there is an invention, a character invented here named Durjaya. Durjaya is a character invented to deepen the family ties. So what happens basically here is that Duryodhan has a change of heart, and when he feels that he is near his deathbed, he realizes his mistakes and he realizes what he has done and what should not have been done. And now the character has become a little positive. Now this is completely in contrast with the original character, and also what happened in Bhasa's Urubhanga. Now this narrative is different, and why did that happen? So if we talk about the typical Sanskrit dramas, then obviously there was not much description of violence there. So the first act is non-violent as per the Sanskrit dramas ideas. There is a description of dead horses, elephants, and the description of whole battles. But the second scene where Duryodhan is wounded and Duryodhan is on his deathbed, the second scene alters that circumstance, and you have the portrayal of violence or death on the stage. Now, the character of Duryodhan has now changed into Suyodhan. Now, dur in Sanskrit is similar to the French word mal, means bad, and Duryodhan, the change of that character has changed into Suryodhan. Now, because Suryodhan accepts the defeat and he realizes his mistakes and his unjust treatment towards Pandavas, and this in this Mahabharata, unlike the other Mahabharata where Duryodhan flees into the forest and dies, here in the act third or act fourth, basically in the end, you see his family members surrounding him. You have Dhritarashtra, you have Gandhari, you have his son Durjaya, who is very young as well to understand anything. So that creates basically a very tragic moment where Duryodhan has a change of heart and he becomes the center of attention. Now this part of plays, now this happens, and he also tries to calm Ashwatthama down, and but the play ends when Ashwatthama comes into onto the stage and declares that he will uh, avenge his friend Duryodhana. So this is how the play goes. Now, if we talk about the technique used in the play, so as Natya Shastra has very well defined, the technique of Thuriyatrika was taken into consideration, which is basically a triple combination. You have songs, you have dance, and you have instrumental music. So this technique was used by Panikkar, and in this, what happened is the first the stage of battle, you have a chorus singing and describing the battlefield. Then two people from that chorus comes out, and you have Bhim and Duryodhan. And then the whole act goes on. And then after the act, after Duryodhan is on his deathbed, and he is surrounded by his family members, this chorus comes back, and it ends with that. So this technique has been used, and the music composed by Panikkar, it was more traditional than classic. It was not your typical classical music. It was a traditional, and the language used was a little vernacular as well. This play is not in typical Sanskrit, which was used before. So these are the changes which have happened from the past till the present, and the changes that Panikkar has made. Now, the the very first thing that needs to be taken into consideration is the fact that Duryodhana has an alter ego here. And you can also say that Panikkar invented a second character known as a Thayam, which is basically an incarnation, or you can say a godhead, an alter ego of Duryodhan, which calms Duryodhan down, which makes Duryodhan understand the his mistakes maybe. And now this scene, and when Duryodhan dies, it comes back into him, and the whole uh, play ends in a tragic end where Duryodhan becomes a center character. So you have this elements used by Panikkar to change the story in a different way. Now this story also the you have a different language, different portrayal, different ways of putting things, and it was definitely different from the story, and the characters has been changed. So the invention of parallel self, the use of chorus, the portrayal of violence, and everything are the techniques used by Panikkar, and the change that has experienced. Although yes, there are certain things which are not appreciated when we talk about his Urubhangam, that it prevents the real experience of violence, pain, rage, or loss. You have so some people claim that the real experience that we should have of the portrayal of violence, and how the extreme loss that his faced, the rage that had been in Duryodhan, but it is not now. So these things were missing. But this is what and by doing this, there is a shift in character, and there is a shift in the viewpoint of looking at mythology called Mahabharata. The last part of this essay is about Ratan Thyam's Chakravyu, and this is a very interesting one because Ratan Thyam also has used an incident from Mahabharata but turned it into his own, and maybe made a few changes which has a symbolic representation of the current contemporary era as well. So we know that Manipur is a state in the northeastern region which has always been in conflict demographically, geographically, and religiously. It has been separate from typical Hindu traditions, but yet it's not completely separated. Even under British rule, it had its own independence. And with the integration of this state into the nation, there has been a lot of conflicts. Where also on the end of Manipur's side, and also from rest of the countries end. So this conflict has been very well shown by Thiam in his view, in his play Chakravyuh, which is another play wherein an excerpt from Mahabharata is taken. So Chakravyuh, I believe you would get an idea that this play is more about the character Abhimanyu, and now not picking up the typically heroic characters, Thyam had taken a not so heroic character, I mean not so main character, and focus is there. So what happens is that in context of Manipur, the war, the violence, and the best thing that Thiam has tried to establish, and his main aim of establishing this was that there is no proper distinction between good and evil. There are no binaries here, and things are pretty gray. And you have the whole conflict of power, the whole conflict of identity, and lies has been shown through this representation, a part of representation of Mahabharata. So what happens here basically? This is as I said, it's a story of Abhimanyu, and Abhimanyu, as we all knew, son of Arjun, who had half the knowledge to solve or to get into a Chakravyu, which was again created by Kauravas on Dronacharya's instructions. So in the beginning of the play, Dronachar has been, it's the 12th day of the Mahabharat of war, and Dronachar has been accused that because you have Arjun as a favorite, your favorite student is on the opposite and you're not doing anything. So Dronacharya comes into picture, and he says that we would create a Chakravyu which would be difficult for Pandavas to cross. And we all know that Arjun has been taken far away from the battlefield. Now, in the morning, Abhimanyu gets to know about this, and he talks with his uncles, I mean, basically Yudhishthir and everyone, and he says that I know how to get into the Chakravyu because when I was in womb, I listened to the conversation that my father and my mother had, and my father explained how to get into the Chakravyu, but he did not explain how to get out of it. So he knows half the knowledge, and Yudhishthir, Bhim, and everyone very well said that okay, we will follow you, we will try to we will help you out. And Abhimanyu wanted a heroic act, so he went through this. Now you have at the end, Abhimanyu is killed mercilessly, and on his while he's dying, there's a monologue where Abhimanyu realizes what was the meaning of this. So this whole in casting Abhimanyu as a protagonist in Chakravyu, Thiams first of all shifts away from your typical heroes, and he also talks about the power grabbers. He talks about how Kaurav and Pandav both were wrong. Not only Kauravas were wrong typically, but Pandavas were also wrong. Interestingly, Thiam loved the character of Duryodhan because he felt that Duryodhan is a character which sticks to his ideology. There is no hypocrisy there. There is no change in what he thinks and what he is. But whereas on the contrary, you have Pandavas which killed Bhishma Pitama with treachery. We have all these incidents where Pandavas did not do the correct thing, but still they are considered as the good side. So with this play, Thiam also takes us away from this typical binary vision of Mahabharata. And there is this narrative as well as violence going on parallelly in the play. So and his attempt to show the status, the condition of Manipur and its people is exactly the same way. Yes. So what happens is that in Bharati's Andha Yuga as well, you have Duryodhan who's bitterly attacking the popular perception of Pandavas being the good harbingers of truth, whereas they are nothing but they are nothing but those people who speak with forked tongues. So he took this as an opportunity to attack the cult of heroism, which is often held up to Manipur youth by political forces playing at sectarian stake. This is something which has been said by Bandhopai Bandyopadhyay in New Karnas when he also analyzes this play in terms of Manipur. So at the end of the play, you have Abhimanyu who is wondering the moment of his farewell, whether he was a hero or he was just a scapegoat, or he was just someone was uh, who was just a pawn in the big chess game, and in the big chess game of power. So this conflict in the character as well shows a conflict among the people, and it's very intense and tragic. And you have the recitation, you have singing, you have the whole effects of sound and light, and there had been a lot of efforts by Thiam on the theatrics of this play, on the elements that were used in the play. But there is also I would not say allegation, but there's also criticism of his play, that because of his focus on technique a lot, where he showed beautifully that okay, Abhimanyu is young, red spotlight is on him, a blue spotlight is on him, and on the right hand side you have parallelly Arjun and his wife talking about Chakravi. So all these uh, elements were used and techniques was great. But there have been people who said that because of a lot of focus on techniques, there has been an observation that um, this has created more this has benefited more to the typical Hindu tradition than Manipur. So there have been critics about that. Also, few Manipur writers also have said that Manipur does not have these many performances of this play as the rest of the world or nation has. So these are few critical observations or opinion that has this play faced. So all in all, this whole essay was more about um, the role of myth, the role of history in this Indian theater, and also how playwrights have used classical stories, classical historical events, and used this same thing to talk about the approaches of to talk about gender, nation, family, community, society, meaning of the past, etc., etc. So yes, inspirations were taken from the past, but they were not exactly a direct retelling of the things that happened in the past or retelling of the stories of the past, but it was more about taking something from the past and presenting it in contemporary times in relation to what is currently happening, and focusing on the multiple aspects, because the Mahabharat is huge and you have a lot of elements which can be still related to the contemporary era. So these playwrights possess a self-sufficiency. These playwrights possess the art of retelling the stories in contemporary time. So this was about this was the essay Myth, Ambivalence and Evil. It was very long. We were not able to justify it fully, but we tried our best.
No, you did very well. I think both of you made it very comprehensive. Yes. So reactions, responses to this. What we can do, as this is very long essay, maybe next week when we meet, we can have discussion on the questions and problems. So by that time, I think all of you should have read this essay and come up with doubts. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so as this is a longish kind of essay, we can, after you go through it, come up with specific doubts, right? And we can discuss them. But overall, what's your response to it? Did you like what it was being discussed? Were you bored? Did you find something interesting? How many of you found something interesting in this? Not necessarily all. Rushi found something interesting. Okay.
Sir, actually, in the beginning, when the emphasis was on the political criticism, I found it very interesting. But in the later part, it became too technical, right? I mean,
Technical in the sense?
in the sense that the author was focused, as far as I heard, the author was focused on analyzing the essay and its
Analyzing the essay.
no, analyzing the place. Sorry.
Right. So analysis of the place, yes. And it is technical. Okay. Now remember, research work has to be technical. So when you write your research for MPhil, PhD or research papers, you have to make it technical because it's not a newspaper report. Right. It is an analysis of text in their historical context, raising very important, complicated issues of modernity, nation, past, in colonial and post-colonial context. Right? So, given this kind of difficulty in understanding both text and context, your own writing is bound to be technical. So there is nothing to feel shy about technicality, right? You can feel shy about jargon mongering, right? Deliberately you feel the need to make things obscure. But I don't think that in this essay, the author was trying to make something obscure deliberately, right? I don't know if you would agree with me. Difficulty for the sake of difficulty nahi hai. It's the difficulty because the issues and the problems that are being discussed are difficult and complex. So it's a complex essay and a technical one, like a research writing has to be. Right? Surushi? Yes, no. What's your response?
Yes, sir.
It has to be like this. You can't write as if ऐसे रामायण महाभारत की कहानी सुना रहे हो वैसे नहीं कह सकते, right? You have to analyze the text. Okay, so anyway, any other quick response? Interesting, boring, or you didn't hear?
Sir, I felt that while discussing Mahabharata, it was quite easy because we knew the characters and the storyline. But while I was reading Andhayug, first of all, it was like I hadn't heard of that before, and while I was reading it, बहुत सारे like there was a lot of information. और जो उसका background है, like it was written after independence, and the kind of social and cultural like the nation, the social and no, the post colonial environment, and the like the I'm not able to articulate it properly, but जैसा वो माहौल था, it was written on that, and the characters were taken from Mahabharata. I think that's really something that we should read. I mean, मैं उसको पढ़ रही थी तो I thought कि ये पढ़ना चाहिए कि इसमें है क्या. Like I read it on Wikipedia, and it says that हाँ, जो partition और वो सारी themes के ऊपर ये लिखा गया है, and उसको उससे भी रिलेट किया है थिएटर ऑफ एब्सर्ड, व्हिच मेक्स सो मच सेंस. वो ऐसे में भी मेंशन किया हुआ है. So it was complex and a little difficult to understand, but it was interesting as well.
Right. Any other quick comment? Any response? No response.
Sir,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
like the controversial part of this essay. Like when they discussing the idea of nation and nationalism, like
Right.
they bringing the pre-colonial past through the like this post-independence theater.
Yes.
So I like that. Read more to understand general.
Right. Okay, so we'll discuss this at length in the next class, right? And I have put a link for the play, the performance of this play on YouTube. You may want to look that up, right?
Also, sir, I just want to add that the best part about
Yes,
Anda Yogesh
sir,
it was
that would
written
be
in
great.
Hindi.
Pardon? Yeah, please repeat. I missed. Somebody said something. Yeah, what happened?
Vibha, you were saying something.
Who was saying something?
Okay, I was saying that it is written in Hindi and normally like मुझे हमने पढ़ा था Indian English playwrights के बारे में like गिरीश कर्नाड और ये महेश दत्तानी and everyone उनके बारे में we knew but Hindi writers और वो भी इतना influential playwright के बारे में we did not know, so I think उसका या तो translated पढ़ना चाहिए या फिर हिंदी
But
at
if you
least.
know Hindi, then read in Hindi. उसको क्या है?
Yeah, yes, exactly. So when I like it is written in Hindi and now
And you
I
will
really
find
feel like I
definitely
should read.
translation.
Yes, sir.
And I have also kept Urubangam as performance, right? In the group. Link to that. Yes. Okay. So we meet next week then, right? For the same paper. But we meet for 4:11 tomorrow. Right? So till then, take care and have a good day.
Thank you, sir.